This is the one and only disclaimer I'm gonna add here. If you are not a crazy person, click off. This video is for people who exist on the same wavelength as me. If you're gonna come in my comments section writing some novel about, well, I dated a girl with BPD and she boiled my bunny alive and killed every girl I follow on Instagram, I ain't reading all that. I'm happy for you though, or sorry that happened. I'm sure there are plenty of other people out there who are willing to listen to you rant about your psycho BPD ex-girlfriend, but I am not the one. I mean, part of the reason I even decided to make a video about BPD stigma is because I once dated a girl with diagnosed BPD, and in retrospect, I was more manipulative towards her and controlling of her than she was towards me. I saw this video a while ago, and even before I was misdiagnosed with BPD, I found it pretty thought-provoking.
This is probably going to be one of my more controversial videos, so I'm just going to say a bunch of true statements, and hopefully we can reach the same conclusion from these statements in the end. Okay? BPD is a disorder that develops in people with extensive trauma. 75% of people with BPD are female. BPD was added to the DSM the same year that the diagnosis of hysteria was removed. That's all.
Part of the reason why I wanted to make this video was because when I got sent to the psych ward for a suicide attempt, I was diagnosed with BPD and bipolar 1 by a psychiatrist who had had 2 Zoom sessions with me that were maybe 30 minutes long each at most. The DSM specifically states that you need to observe somebody over a 6-month period to diagnose them with a personality disorder. This same psychiatrist also suggested that I try Ozempic because she put me on antipsychotics that might cause weight gain. I am 115 pounds, and in the past, I had a case of anorexia binge purge subtype that was so severe I almost died of heart failure. After I was released from the psych ward, I was sent to a PhD program for a longer period of time, and after I explained to the psychiatrist there that my BPD symptoms only manifested in unhealthy relationships, he said that he believed that I was misdiagnosed with BPD, and I actually had CPTSD along with the bipolar. I was discharged from the PhD program because of insurance reasons, but I had to continue seeing this nurse to get my medication refilled. And let me tell you, this woman has really cemented my belief that male bullies become cops and female bullies become nurses or teachers. It's like they go into this field not because they want to help people, but because it gives them control over vulnerable people. Not only does this woman believe that I have a personality disorder, she also seems to believe that I am faking being bipolar as a part of my personality disorder, even though my dad is also bipolar. She threatened to take me off my Seroquel and put me on the highest dose of Prozac possible. Manic episode speedrun. The thing is, when someone is accusing you of having a personality disorder, you can't even argue with them about it, because the more you argue with them about it, the more convinced they become that you do have a personality disorder. Every time I bring up a symptom that she can't chalk up to a BPD trait, she totally ignores me. It's like she just plugs her ears and goes, la 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 la. This woman seems to think that I'm this narcissistic black hole that will collapse in on itself if it doesn't receive attention and validation for 5 seconds. Every time I bring up any situation, ranging from an awkward social interaction to a genuinely traumatic experience, she'll go, and that was hard for you because you wanted validation and you didn't get it. You felt invalidated. She's like a Tickle Me Elmo doll, trained to spit out one of three canned responses when you press one of her buttons. And if she does it one more time, I am going ape mode. As always, this is a joke for legal reasons. I cannot begin to describe how infuriating it is to hear somebody who has never been in a situation remotely similar to mine tell me that my reaction to the situation that they've never been in is indicative of something fundamentally wrong with my personality. Like, wow! The person who got held in a basement and beaten with metal rods until their skin turned green because they acted too much like a boy now has a complicated relationship with their gender identity. That's crazy. Who could have seen that coming? They must be a secondary psychopath. I see a lot of kids on the internet self-diagnosing cluster B conditions or saying that they're actively seeking out a diagnosis for a cluster B personality disorder. And while I think self-awareness is good, and I don't want to discourage anyone from seeking help, I don't think you guys really understand the consequences of having something like that on your records. The really tragic thing is that a lot of therapists will outright refuse to work with patients who have BPD, let alone NPD or ASPD, because they believe that they cannot be helped and they cannot change, and therefore it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I've even heard horror stories of people going to the hospital with serious medical complaints totally unrelated to mental illness, and then being denied pain medication because they had BPD on their records and the nurses determined that they must be a manipulative drug seeker or that they even have Munchausen syndrome. The funniest part is that a lot of these people who rabidly hate borderlines with a passion are just people who armchair diagnosed their ex, and now they've decided that everybody with BPD is like Homelander and Jeffrey Dahmer and Tony Soprano's mom fused into one person. You ever wonder why all of a sudden every guy you know has a crazy ex-girlfriend with BPD? Don't you know? BPD is bad person disorder, which means that you can treat a woman as terribly as you want to, and if she has BPD, it's always justified. I've heard so many female abuse victims say that at one point their boyfriend or husband accused them of having BPD, and I definitely think that sometimes there is a little bit of projection at play here. I have had something similar happen to me, but I don't really want to go into detail about it because this person does have a way of finding every single social media account I've ever created. I understand that being around people with cluster B traits is not always fun, to say the least. But if you're 30 years old, posting about your 19-year-old girlfriend on r/BPT loved ones, I think maybe it's time for you to do a little bit of self-reflection too. All cluster B personality disorders are typically traumagenic. However, BPD, I would say, that particular cluster of behaviors is more of a typical trauma response than, say, NPD or ASPD. BPD is usually caused by some sort of abandonment trauma in a person's childhood, and therefore when someone triggers that fear of abandonment, they go into fight or flight mode. Although all cluster B disorders display manipulative traits, with BPD the manipulation is usually rooted in a fear of being abandoned, whereas with NPD or ASPD, it's typically rooted in a desire to gain control over other people, to gain power, to feel superior. Although manipulating people is obviously bad, regardless of whether you're consciously manipulating them or not, I think that BPD should be classed as a trauma/attachment disorder rather than a personality disorder, because they are not consciously manipulating people most of the time. I don't intend to demonize NPD or ASPD here, because I do believe that narcissists and sociopaths who are self-aware can change. But BPD, in my eyes, it's more similar to fight mode CPTSD than NPD or ASPD. The symptoms of BPD are not unique to BPD in the same way that, say, lacking guilt and intentionally exploiting others is unique to NPD and ASPD. Even black and white thinking and splitting, which is often thought of as unique to BPD, can also occur in people who have NPD, ASPD, bipolar, or even autism. You'd be shocked as to how many autistic women are first misdiagnosed as having BPD. Black and white thinking, big emotional meltdowns, and rejection-sensitive dysphoria are all very common in autism. A man and a woman could walk into a psychiatrist's office displaying the exact same symptoms, but the woman would come out with a BPD diagnosis, and the man would come out with an NPD or bipolar diagnosis. I once knew a guy who was a diagnosed sociopath. For years, I could make a whole separate video about this. But anyways, people have this idea that sociopaths are cool as a cucumber. Not this guy, The only thing Patrick Bateman-esque about him was his obsessive skincare routine, and the only thing that set him apart from someone with severe BPD was that he was markedly more sadistic. He bragged about all the ways that he fucked up other people's lives. He was just messy. I don't know. He would usually have like 3 different dating apps installed at once until he got banned from one of them. And he would hook up with a different person like every night and tell me all about it. He was a massive cokehead. He cut himself. He would post photos of himself on his story of him hunched over a toilet bowl after throwing up his last meal. He became absolutely obsessed with and attached to me, and at a certain point, he was usually calling me around 8 times a day. Despite everything, I still feel bad for him. He acted like that because that's all he knew. He never had any healthy role models to look up to. Everyone who was around him when he was growing up mistreated him horribly. He also functions as a good example of gender bias when it comes to diagnosing conditions. A while ago, when I made a video talking about why I'm hesitant to transition even though I have gender dysphoria, I got this lovely comment from a trans man. I don't know how to say this in a politically correct way. Before you tell me that I have the most female personality disorder of all time, consider that if you walked into a doctor's office in the 1940s and said, "I am a man, give me testosterone," they would diagnose you with schizophrenia or some form of hysteria and lobotomize you. So don't get too cocky, bro. Get it? Cocky? When the symptoms of this disorder overlap so heavily with other conditions, diagnosing people with it often hurts them more than it helps them, and the label is more often used as an insult towards any woman who acts quote-unquote crazy or hysterical than it is used as an actual descriptor of someone's mental state. Does this label even need to exist? I don't think the label of borderline personality disorder is helpful because having an intense fear of abandonment and latching on to anyone who gives you the slightest crumb of affection or attention means that there is something fundamentally wrong with your personality. That's just what happens when someone is extremely traumatized. Some people might argue, well, the BPD label is necessary because a lot of the time people can't access DBT unless they have a BPD diagnosis. But I would argue that that's more indicative of corruption within the medical field than anything else. You shouldn't have to receive an extremely stigmatized diagnosis just so that you can access therapy that's going to help you. Lazy psychiatrists give out a BPD diagnosis like candy to every woman or LGBT person that is complex or disagreeable or a little morally gray or just an imperfect victim. Because the BPD label encompasses so many symptoms that also occur in so many other disorders, it's a lot easier to slap a BPD label on someone and chalk up their behaviors to seeking attention or validation than it is to actually figure out the root cause or tease out any other mental conditions that may possibly be contributing to their behavior. I have CPTSD and bipolar and autism and ADHD and social anxiety. A lot easier to just slap a BPD label on me and call it a day. Plus, I look like this. Look at this psycho butch lesbian ranting into a camera, obvious BPD nutcase. I've talked a lot about sexist bias when it comes to diagnosing BPD, but I'd seriously like to see a study on just how much more likely women with unnaturally colored hair are to be diagnosed with it than women with natural hair. It's kind of a who came first, the chicken or the egg thing. Is it really that women with dyed hair, piercings, tattoos, etc. are more likely to be mentally ill? Or is it that mental health professionals see any signs of deviation from the norm as a symptom of mental illness? I am a weird case because I'm definitely more of like the hyper-empathetic type of autist than the low empathy type of autist. I was the kid who would cry when somebody would step on a caterpillar. But then at the same time, I have a lot of bottled up anger due to not standing up for myself enough when I was being bullied and abused as a kid, which means that now when somebody wrongs me, I feel the need to overcompensate for it. Autistic people may not display empathy in the way that neurotypicals do, but we strongly value honesty and integrity. And like I've said before, I don't care if someone I knew was a bad person wrongs me, but if I feel like somebody has betrayed me, that drives me nuts. I tend to have one of two responses when someone says or does something that hurts me. Either, one, I will massively underreact and just sit there and even try to empathize with the person even as they're hurling insults at me. Or two, I will massively overreact and cause drama and chaos. Do I really have no sense of self? Or am I just in denial of certain aspects of who I am because I have faced so much backlash for those aspects of who I am? For a while, I thought that I was too argumentative, too aggressive. But when I really think about it, I'm actually too non-confrontational. I'm gonna say this because I think a lot of you, including myself, need to hear it. Being non-confrontational does not make you a good person. In a lot of cases, being non-confrontational actually makes you a worse person. Being non-confrontational and being passive-aggressive go hand in hand. I have lost a lot of friends because I would bottle up my emotions until I exploded. Someone would do a whole bunch of things that pissed me off, and I wouldn't confront them about it because I didn't want to jeopardize the friendship, but then they'd end up doing some relatively minor thing that just happened to tip me over the edge, and then I'd blow up, and then I'd actually lose the friend. I see a lot of people in my comments telling me, "You're so cool, I wish I was friends with you," bless their hearts. But trust me, you don't want to be my friend. I'm the kind of person who is best observed from a distance. I'm glad that you guys find my lore entertaining, but you can't have the kind of lore that I have without being a villain in multiple other people's stories. I would kill to be a normal, boring person with a normal, boring story. Confronting someone for doing something that hurt you doesn't make you an asshole, but you know what does? blowing up at somebody or cutting them off seemingly out of nowhere and then just leaving them confused as to what they did wrong. I've pretty much said everything that I wanted to say, so thank you guys for watching. I hope you found this video enlightening or at least entertaining in a twisted way. See you next time.